All of these tribes were originally black tribes of the Yamasee. And as far as the Yamasee mixing with the African slaves, the Yamasee and African runaways had a few things in common. They were both of the same ethnic background, they were able to blend in with each other, and they both had hatred for the British. Throughout slavery, thousands of African slaves escaped the plantations and sought refuge with the neighboring Native American tribes. The natives had an incredible knowledge of outdoor survival and location. It is often believed that Harriet Tubman herself, who freed slaves via the Underground Railroad, was herself a black Native American because of her knowledge of the paths and the terrain. Many African slaves and Native Americans mixed. Even the red tribes took in African slaves. Some tribes even owned slaves. However, unlike the Europeans, Africans were mostly considered indentured servants and treated as human beings by their Native American owners. Today there are red Seminoles and black Seminoles, red Creeks and black Creeks, red Cherokee and black Cherokee. The Seminoles, they did oppose slavery. The U.S. Army prosecuted the Seminoles because they opposed slavery. The Seminoles realized that the people who were being sold into slavery were a faction of them, distant cousins, relatives in a way. The black Seminoles was the only tribe at the time that opposed slavery. U.S. slaveholders tried to cause tension between red Seminoles and black Seminoles. Thus, a war erupted between the Seminoles and the U.S. slaveholders. Seminoles and African slaves joined together and attacked slave plantations. General Andrew Jackson prepared to wipe out the Seminoles. Jackson gathered Creek tribes along the U.S. soldiers to destroy the Seminoles. This war lasted for decades and extended all throughout Florida. By 1826, wealthy Creeks who had also owned slaves were sent to persuade the Seminoles to join in on the slave trade. When the Seminoles once again refused, Seminoles were kidnapped and sold on the southern slave markets. The U.S. Army was also trying to push the red Seminoles out of Florida onto reserved Indian territory west of the Mississippi. The Army was faced with much opposition with the resistance of the Seminoles, who were guided by the red Seminole chief Osceola. The red Seminoles knew that the whites would not follow after them for their fear of alligators and snakes. The black Seminoles remained in Texas and moved into Oklahoma, Idaho, and mixed in with the Blackfeet, Comanche, the Kiowa, Apache, the Mandan, the Omaha, Osage, Pawnee, and Arikara, and their closest relatives, the Wichita. You know, people wonder if the actual Blackfoot Indians got their name because they were black Americans. And, you know, that's not necessarily so. The Blackfoot Indians got their name because they would stain their moccasins with burnt ashes. The Blackfoot tribe was at one time Saskatchewan Native Americans who relocated to the Montana in search for buffalo. The Blackfoot or Blackfeet consists of three divisions: the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piegan. The entire group is known as Bloods and are descendants of the Wichita Yamasee Moors. If you look closely at many Native American tribes, you can still see their African traits. You may wonder, are there any black tribes left? There is a woman named Verdiachi Washita Turner Gaston L. Bay, and she's the legal heir by blood to the Mason Rouge land grants that were willed to her by her great-great-grandfather Henry Turner. Verdiachi's land is the District of Louisiana, which is named after her great-great-great-grandfather's friend, Louis Bourguignon, who sold the land to Joseph de Maison Rouge in 1795. Joseph had a daughter named Anne, in which the land went to her. Annie named the land Louisiana after Louis and Annie. In 1848, the U.S. government took the Turners to court to take the District of Louisiana. However, the government lost, and the land was granted to the heirs of Henry Turner, Verdiachi Washita Turner Gaston L. Bay. Verdiachi has set up a sovereign nation of Washita Moors that is recognized by the United States government. The Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minority Workers Groups on Indigenous Populations recognized the Wichita as the oldest indigenous people on the earth. The U.S. government does not own the District of Louisiana, as we may believe. Also, the state of Georgia is owned by a Yamasee. It is documented. Many Native Americans signed treaties with the U.S. government, but never actually sold any of their land over. Technically, the land still belongs to the so-called Indians, not the federal government. So you may be wondering if I'm trying to say that out of the 550 some odd Native American tribes, they're all descendants of black people. I'm saying that all so-called American Indians descended from the Mexican Olmecs and the various African and Asian mixtures throughout. How does this make other Native Americans feel, especially today's Red Indian? It is important that we as Americans understand the origin of the so-called American Indian, and it is important that we accept the truth. Black Indians are no more native than the so-called red man in culture. The culture and religion that is practiced by today's Native Americans is the natural, non-theological concept of the Malian Moors of Africa, the Olmecs, and the Aztecs of Mexico, as well as the early concept of the mound builders. There are various tribes today that will admit to their African ancestry. The Hopis, Apache, Aztec, Zuni, Nez Perce, Miami, Blackfoot, Catawba, and Seminole all possess knowledge of African ancestry. What's more important is not the feeling concerning indigenous people, but more so the truthful data and the validity and acceptance of that data. You may be asking, why do Red Native Americans believe that they are the first? Well, many Red Native Americans are well aware of the information that I've just presented to you, and some are not aware. Tribes like the Hopi, Aztec, Apache, Pueblo, Seminole, Creek, Tuscaros, and Susquehanna have documents in their possession that tells the stories of the black gods who gave them birth. In fact, the Hopi Book of the Stars that was given to them by the Dogons tells that when the forefathers, Africans, reclaim their throne, the black and red tribes will join together and overcome their oppressors. There is a similar parable in most Native American cultures that speaks of the white eagle who has captured the red eagle until the black eagle freed the red eagle. The white eagle retreated into the cave from which he came. Look up this story. It's an actual Native American culture. It is just as important for Native Americans to understand true history as it is for black Americans to understand true history. Blacks have been convinced that they are all ex-African slaves. Of course, this is a lie. There had been blacks in this country for thousands of years before the first Europeans. There are millions of blacks in America today who, if they trace their family heritage back, will not find any African slavery in their family. Many blacks are children of the Yamasee, Seminole, Creek, Cherokee, Blackfoot, Shoshone, etc. However, the U.S. government, in order to protect their best interests, has kept most of this information and true history from us. The U.S. government has convinced us to classify ourselves as a title that the European political system created in order to place us in a certain social bracket, African American. As an African American, we have no inalienable or indigenous rights under the Constitution. Even worse, as an African American Christian, we dig an even deeper hole for ourselves. As black Christians, we have to admit two things. We are former slaves by calling ourselves African, and we are former slaves who converted to the slave owner's religion. Thus, we sever any connection to sovereignty or self-identity. As African American Christians, we literally become dependent on the government and relinquish all indigenous and self-governing classifications. Thus, we throw ourselves on the mercy of the U.S. judicial system. Native Americans have what is called autonomy or self-government, similar to diplomatic immunity. As indigenous people, we have the right to set up our own sovereign nations. We govern our own judicial, legislative, and penal system. As African Americans, we waive the right of self-governing and indigenous rights by admitting that we are immigrants, came over from somewhere else and not indigenous.